Well, good evening. This is Jacob Hornberger, and welcome back to the Jacob Hornberger Show. Nice to be back with y'all after a week absent from the show. I suppose y'all saw that the Republican members of the House are negotiating with the Democratic members of the House to determine what they're going to do about the debt ceiling. Now, those of you who are familiar with my articles and familiar with this show know that I've made a prediction. And that prediction is that the Republicans are going to cave. And I'm not going to back off from this prediction at all. In fact, I'm gonna repeat it, and I'm going to re-emphasize it because there's absolutely no doubt that the Republicans, despite all their huff and puff and bravado and everything, they're going to cave. Well, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. I mean, the Republicans have been caving, oh gosh, all the way back to the New Deal, where they caved into to the socialist fascist system that Roosevelt was imposing on the country, and they've caved ever since because that was the way to get votes. They were concerned about losing power, and they felt, well, we got to become part of the problem. And the fact that they're even negotiating. I mean, what do you negotiate? What's the point? You've got a debt ceiling. A ceiling is a ceiling. What a ceiling is saying is, you've mounted too much debt. You've imposed too much debt on the backs of the American people. And make no mistake about it, the American people, you, are ultimately responsible for the repayment of this debt. I mean, what is it up to now? Some $45,000 a person? You got 4 people in your family? Do the math. I mean, go ahead and put that indebtedness on your financial statement. When you go to the bank, see what the bank says. When you say, well, okay, I've got here my assets, here my liabilities. Oh, I've got an additional liability of $160-something thousand from my 4-member family here because that's my share of the government's debt that these people in Congress and the president continue to load on you. I mean, they've got a credit card. It's got no limit on it. They can't max it out, and it's drawn on you. You're the guy that's got to pay the bill. And they don't give a hoot. I mean, did you see them the last time the debt ceiling, a ceiling was reached? I don't know when it was, maybe a couple of years ago. Did you see them say, well, you know what? We just raised the debt ceiling, and now we're going to be coming up to another one in 2 years. We've really got to get this thing in order because we can't afford to raise the debt ceiling again. The reason you have a ceiling is because you're saying to the American people, there's too much debt, and we're not going to bust through that ceiling. That's going to be the max, and that's it. Did you see them saying that the last time the ceiling was reached? That, hey, we got 2 years now. We've got to get our ducks in a row. We got to get things set because we can't raise it again. Of course not. They didn't care because they know it's all a big game. It's a rigmarole. That's what the Republicans are doing. That's what the Democrats are doing. They're all just playing a game, and they know, both of them know, that when push comes to shove, they're going to go ahead and raise the ceiling again, which means for the next couple of years, massive amounts of more debt piled onto the American people. I mean, you get a sense of how indifferent these people are to this thing with this Libyan war. I mean, think about it. Here they are running up against this debt ceiling, and presumably it's a ceiling. I mean, they can't really count on the fact that it's going to be raised, but they do. Obama just goes in there with this little optional war he's got and decides he's going to attack this country and just spend whatever amount of money he wants to spend. He doesn't go to Congress for a declaration of war. He doesn't go in there and say, look, this thing's going to cost such and such. May I have a declaration of war? No. He just acts like he's got a credit card that he can just draw on, to the max. I mean, it wasn't like Libya attacked us and we're defending ourselves. This was totally an optional military engagement. I don't know, I'm not sure exactly how much is spent, $6 billion or so. And of course they would say, oh, well, it's just a small amount. But you see, that's what they say on all these government programs. I mean, if you go down the list on all the departments and agencies and all the programs, I mean, all the welfare state programs, the drug war, you go into the warfare state programs, the military bases overseas, the military bases here, the occupations, the assassinations, every one of those programs, they'll say, oh, but it's just a small amount of the budget, so we really don't need to cut that out because it's not really going to affect anything. Well, except that, when you start adding up all these individual programs, oh, by the way, they'll say the same thing about Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, the crown jewels of the welfare state. But you start adding up all these programs, and all of a sudden you get to 100%. You see, all the individual, what they call the little ones, add up to 100%. But notice the indifference. Obama didn't care. He wasn't saying, oh my gosh, should I do this because I don't think we have enough money here. We've got the debt ceiling. I can't go out and borrow more money because I got this ceiling coming up. He didn't give a hoot. He just went out there and did it. And let me tell you something. These people, did you see where they were negotiating also, or these resolutions about Libya, where Obama, he has not gone in to get a declaration of war. We all know that. I mean, he's behaving in violation of law, what I consider a high crime or misdemeanor. This is really a political felony. I mean, his forces just dropped a bomb on children, on a baby, a newborn baby. And they say the same thing. We have our regrets, and it's not like we intended to do it. When you go around dropping bombs on people, if they haven't learned this now from Iraq and Afghanistan and Vietnam and whatever, that when you go around dropping bombs on military forces, you're inevitably going to kill babies and children as part of that process. And so, yeah, that no declaration of war. And so here the Congress has a chance to vote to terminate the funds. Now, I got to give them credit. At least they didn't give what Obama wanted, a fig leaf. He knows he's in the wrong on this thing because they got him on record before he ran for office, where he said, no, a president doesn't have the authority to go to war on his own. Now that he's the president, he says, oh, I can be a dictator. I don't need anybody's permission. I can do whatever I want because I'm a commander-in-chief. And so he goes out and attacks this country. And he kills, his forces kill children and babies and military forces too. I mean, what gives them the right to kill Libyan military forces? Here in this country, when a soldier gets killed, there's a lot of people grieving. There's family members, the wife, the children, the parents, the cousins, the brothers. You think that doesn't happen in Libya? Yeah, those soldiers that they call it degrading Libyan forces. Oh, come on. They're killing soldiers, many of whom have been conscripted. I mean, they got the draft just like we have the draft. Okay, we don't have the draft right now, but it's a standby power. They can take anybody they want for their little foreign wars and their foreign adventures. But notice that the House had a chance. I mean, they did not give him what he wanted, which was, a resolution to keep doing what he's doing in Libya. And so he's now in violation. Well, he's been in violation of the constitutional requirement on the declaration of war. He's now clearly in violation, continuous violation of the War Powers Act, because he didn't get what he was hoping to get. He thought that he could maneuver people, where it say, oh, well, you got to be patriotic, you got to support the troops, and we're at war, and you got to come with, didn't quite work this way, which is kind of interesting, because notice that the people that voted didn't vote for his little war. That we've come to a point in this country where we don't hear these silly accusations of, oh, you lack patriotism, oh, you're a traitor, oh my gosh, you're not supporting the troops, and all that nonsense that we heard after 9/11 when they invaded Iraq and Afghanistan and so forth. So here are these people in Congress that are not supporting this war, and thank goodness that we've got some type of an enlightenment going on in this country where that's being respected, that position's being respected, that people can take the position that a war is absolutely wrongful and be patriots about it. because they're concerned about the country. As compared to the people over there, they're concerned about the government. You know, oh, we're going to lose pride. We're going to lose pride. Well, but then let's give discredit where discredit's due. They had a chance to just cut off the purse strings for this operation. I mean, remember, the Republicans control the House. All they had to do is just take a vote to cut this thing off. And did they do that? Of course not. You know, they didn't do it. Now, they can't argue that, oh, well, the troops will be left out without bullets, you know, which has always been a ridiculous notion anyway. But there's no troops on the ground. I mean, what you're talking about is cutting off the money, is you're cutting off the bombs. Now, yeah, it'll hurt the bomb makers, you know, oh gosh, the bomb makers, they're not making enough bombs anymore, you know. But so what? I mean, you know, who cares about that? They could have cut it off, and they could have cut it off knowing about this debt ceiling. They didn't do that. I mean, there's this ceiling here. That's why I know that the Republicans are going to cave. I mean, you know, if they were really concerned about this ceiling being hit, they'd say, hey, we don't have the money. I mean, this thing's got to stop right now. I mean, if your family is you know, up against the wall financially, you just start cutting out the things that you know, the luxuries, the things that you don't really have to do. And they don't really have to be bombing people in Libya. And that's just a clear-cut example, if you could ever find one, where none of these people, Republicans and Democrats alike, give a hoot about this debt ceiling. And the more massive debt that they keep loading on people, there's no telling where this thing's going to end, because I guarantee you they're going to raise the ceiling. They're saying, oh, well, there'd be a default. There'd be a default. Well, not necessarily, because they could use the tax revenues to pay at least the interest on the debt. And so you say, oh, but Jacob, what about Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid? Oh, well, you see, it's the welfare state here that's interfering with things. You know, the situation is this. They've got the welfare state going, you know, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, farm subsidies, you know, foreign aid to dictators there in the Middle East, foreign aid to the Israeli government, foreign aid to all kinds of governments, education grants, grants for your community. They got this thing, you know, wired in terms of socialism all over the country. And then they got the drug war, and they got all their armies of regulators that are eating out the substance of the business community. And then they've got their warfare state, the empire, you know, 1,000 bases in more than 130 countries, 2 occupations, killing people in 6 countries. I mean, they've got massive spending going on here, right? And that spending, okay, is partly for the welfare, partly for the regulations, the drug war and so forth, partly for the warfare and the empire, and then partly to pay the interest on the debt that's been accumulated over the past several years to pay for all this socialist junk. Well, what they're saying is, well, we'll have to default on these payments on the debt because we got to make all our welfare payments first. Well, that's just nonsense. What they could do is pay the interest on the debt with the tax monies that are coming in, and then over here, you know, stop paying welfare and bring the troops home. Close the bases overseas. I mean, there's a way to do this. But you got to start shutting things down the same way that any family does. That's what they're not prepared to do. You see, they want everything. They want to continue spending on all their massive welfare state programs, on their failed immoral and destructive drug war, on their failed occupations and assassination and torture programs and foreign empire. They want to keep spending it all. And that's why they're going to raise this debt ceiling. Because in order to get the difference, you see, they're only bringing in tax revenues that are form a part of all these expenses. So how do they pay the bills on the other part of the expenses? They just go out and keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, including from the Chinese communists. I mean, can you imagine? This was the regime that was supporting the North Vietnamese in the Vietnam War, that was killing Americans. Everybody acknowledges it is one of the most brutal, authoritarian, totalitarian regimes. I mean, I was just reading in the paper today where the Chinese communists, let out a guy in jail because he criticized the government. And that's where he was in jail, because he criticized the government. And when he comes out, he says, I don't want to talk. I don't want to talk. Because he knows what they'll do to him. And that's the regime, this totalitarian, brutal, communist regime that is now among the principal foreign creditors, if not the biggest foreign creditor of the United States. It is the most shocking, unbelievable thing that one can ever imagine. I mean, you'd think there'd be some sense of morality in these people, consciousness of saying, we can't go to these people. This is the same regime that was killing Americans during the Vietnam War. This is a totalitarian regime that killed people at Tiananmen Square. Oh, no, we have to go borrow from them. And now, why do you think they're so nice to them? Our federal officials are so nice, Hillary Clinton and everything, because they're holding all this government paper. It's like you go to the bank and you owe the bank a lot of money. You're going to be real nice to that banker as your note's coming due. Yeah, because he can call the note. And that's the horror of this thing. So they're going to raise this debt ceiling in order to keep borrowing the difference over here. Now, the Democrats want to raise the taxes to cover that difference. The Republicans are digging in their heels and saying, no new taxes, no new taxes. But you see, it's a ridiculous position that the Republicans are taking, because as Milton Friedman pointed out time and time again, the real level of taxes is not what the IRS is bringing in. The real level of taxes is what the government is spending, because that spending is ultimately going to have to be paid. I mean, it's coming out of people's pockets one way or another, whether they're going out and borrowing or whether they're getting the Federal Reserve to just print the money to pay that difference. That's when you start seeing prices start rising across the board, the gasoline prices, the food prices, and so forth. So that's a tax. It's called the inflation tax. And no, inflation doesn't attack a country like the flu or something where you don't know where it's coming. We all know, at least we libertarians know where it's coming. It's at Federal Reserve. That's the purpose of the Federal Reserve. Okay? Oh, they'll tell you, no, the Federal Reserve is to keep the monetary system stable. Nonsense. I mean, what? The dollar, I think, has lost, I don't know, a third of its value just in the last 10 years. And what, 95% of its value since the Fed was established? I mean, it's worth like a nickel compared to the value back then. I mean, this is the Fed. They keep flooding decade after decade of stimulus funds, and they've debased the value of our currency. And they're still doing it. I mean, they're trying their best to do it. Because, you see, they're still enraptured with this notion of Keynesianism. This failed, destructive, immoral economic philosophy that, we can spend ourselves rich, that this is the secret to poverty, that just have the government spend money and spend money. And where does the government get the money? Well, they don't like to think about that. Taxes, okay, there's your first one. That's what the IRS is all about. Borrowing, that's what they're doing right now. That's what lifting this debt ceiling's about. Let's put some more debt on the back of the American people. And then, of course, there's the Federal Reserve, which monetizes the debt. It starts paying off creditors and cheap and debased dollars, or it just starts paying the bills that way. Either way, it's a devaluation of the dollar. It's a default. Now, people keep saying, oh, well, gosh, the government's going to have to default if the debt ceiling's not raised. Well, if that's the case, then that's the case. I mean, you should have thought about that 2 years ago. Should have thought about that before you invaded Libya. Should have thought about that before you maintained these 10, 11-year occupations of these countries. You should have thought about that as you were, expanding these military bases overseas, as you were expanding health care, government benefits, Medicare and Medicaid and your little community grants at election time. You should have thought about all that. In other words, when you're facing the possibility that you're going to default on your debts because you don't have enough money, You don't just say, oh, they'll be pressed up against the wall when the debt ceiling comes up. They won't have a choice. And the mainstream media pipes into this thing. They'll say, oh, this is irresponsible. Oh, we've got to do this. Oh, this will be catastrophic. Yeah, where were they? Where was these mainstream journalist status the last 2 years? Were they ever saying, hey, we got a debt ceiling coming up? Are you kidding? It was the exact opposite. They've been talking about the stimulus money, right? The bailout, remember the massive bailout of their Wall Street cronies that had made bad investments? And so they needed to be bailed out with taxpayer money. That was stimulus. And, um, and so where has the stimulus left us? it's left us no better off. I mean, all I keep hearing is, oh, well, we're broke. We're busted. Unemployment's up higher. But let me tell you what they're trying to do with this stimulus. This is what they've been doing for decades. This Keynesian nonsense holds that you can spend yourself rich. Okay? I mean, try that as a family or as a person. Just go out and spend yourself rich. You know how the president says, go to the mall, bring the economy back. All right, you go to the mall and spend everything you have, and you see how well you are in spending yourself rich. Well, ridiculous, right? Okay. Well, their position, the statist position, is that the government is different, that it can spend the nation rich. Okay? That the government just keeps spending money and spending money, including the Federal Reserve. I mean, they make no bones about it. I mean, this is what they're talking about with Greece. They're lamenting the fact that Greece is part of the Eurozone where they can't print the money like the Federal Reserve does. You see, the Greek situation is very fascinating because it's sort of like a signal of what we're facing in this country. I mean, it's absolutely fascinating. Here, the Greek people, now keep in mind, they don't have a big warfare state like we do. Now, they don't have a big capital base, of as big a base of capital and wealth and income that we do. But that's because they've had a lot of socialism over there. We've had a lot ourselves, but they got double the socialism or triple or whatever with their welfare state, like all these European countries. And they've been spending more than what they were bringing in tax revenue. And they were hiding it. They were lying about it, surprise, surprise. And finally, the markets figured out. And so they start blaming the speculators. And the speculators are the cause of all this, and the banksters and the greedy people. But nobody wants to stop to think about the fact that it's the welfare you're doling out, because once you start giving out freebies, the number of people that want the freebies, that don't want to work and so forth, want to retire early, hey, free retirement, free health care, that starts multiplying. And then the people that are supporting this monstrosity, the taxpayers, the productive people, it's like, you get to a point where everything starts to cave in. I mean, that's what happened in Cuba, where they established their welfare state. When that's socialism. I mean, in Cuba they got free education, like we do here, free public schooling, free health care. They took everything from the rich in Cuba, everything. And of course now everybody's desperately poor. I mean, they took over the businesses and they ran them into the ground. I mean, that's the government. And a lot of the successful businesses fled the country. And so they did it completely. They did the welfare state totally in Cuba. In Greece, they did it partly, but heavily. And so they were borrowing to cover the difference, because if you tax people to cover that difference, you keep raising taxes, you break the backs of the private sector. You kill the golden goose who's laying the eggs, And so they kept borrowing. They were lying about it, covering up. And finally, the market figures it out, and now they're busted. And so they're the same thing. Oh, well, if we don't bail out Greece, they'll default and there'll be chaos and whatever. Hey, look. If you get yourself into a position where you can't pay your bills, that's your problem. I mean, if that means that you default, then maybe you'll learn better next time. If you have to file bankruptcy, well, that means nobody's going to lend to you, at least not for a while, till you get more credit worthy. Hey, if That's your responsibility, but it'll teach a valuable lesson, hopefully. Um, but no, what they do in Greece is they're using our taxpayer money over here. Now, I don't know about you, but I mean, most people are having, a tough time right now, struggling, making ends meet, covering kids' educations and so forth, especially people at college age. And, you know, this idea of Americans funding this Greek situation because the Greek people don't want to give up their free retirement and their free health care. I mean, they're like hopping mad. We have a right to this. They take the same attitude as welfare recipients here too. You know, Social Security, Medicare. You're not going to take I put it in. I got a right to take it out. That's their attitude over there, and they're prepared to riot. But they don't think about the fact, or maybe they do, that the government is not this independent wealth producer. It's got to tax people. I mean, I wonder what the Greek people would say if the government says, okay, we're going to give everybody a free $100,000. Okay, we'll be sending you the check. But we're going to raise everybody's taxes $100,000. So per head tax of $100,000, but we're going to be sending it to you for free. Well, you see, they take the same attitude that Americans take, that no, I don't want to pay for it. I don't want to pay a higher tax. I just want my dole, you know? And so they're expecting Americans to bail them out, Europeans, and Europeans are now, they cut a deal. Looks like they're going to bail them out again. Remember that massive bailout just a few months ago? Well, that's because the reason they need it again is because they didn't learn. They didn't slash their spending. They didn't abolish programs. They didn't reevaluate the whole welfare state concept, the whole socialist concept. And so now they're back at it again. And a lot of it is that the European banks, they're lobbying for the bailout because they're holding the debt. They're the ones that have loaned the Greek government this money, so they got all this paper, and so the bailout comes to them. So there's more here that meets the eye. But in any event, that's a situation in Greece, and that's the situation that we're facing, not as desperate yet, but it's on the horizon, you see. And so they're saying, oh, well, we've got to increase the debt ceiling. Well, what they're really saying is we need to keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, because I guarantee you, they're not going to cut the spending. Did you see them cut the spending 2 years ago when the debt ceiling was raised? Did you see them reevaluating it, like I said a few minutes ago, saying, oh, we can't do this? No, they don't care, because they know that the debt ceiling is going to be raised and the debt's going to keep mounting and mounting and mounting, because they ain't cutting anything. And to the extent they do, it's going to be minuscule. I mean, really what they should have done 2 years ago is start abolishing programs. You know, abolish Medicare, abolish Medicaid. It's been a disaster. Let's face it, these socialist programs have been a disaster for this country. Social Security's been a disaster. Nobody put their money into anything. There's no fund there. There's no IRA account. Social Security is based on an attack on the young people, on people's children, their grandchildren. And we disguise that when we say, oh, I put it out of a right to get it back. That's what the Greek people are doing. Oh, the government owes me. The government does this. As if the government were some magic entity. It's like Bastia. The government's just a fiction. You know, on Social Security, the government's a fiction by which old people, the seniors, are trying to get into the pocketbooks of their children, their grandchildren, and their friends in their generation who are struggling to raise a family. That's what it is. It's an intergenerational attack, an assault, because there's no fund there. There never was a fund. It's just a stray welfare program. And so they don't want to abolish any of these programs. It's like, you know, they're holding on to as anchors are sinking down to the bottom of the ocean, and we libertarians are saying, let go of the anchor. And the people that are holding on to the anchor are saying, oh, no, I would die without Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and the empire and the occupations, and, oh, my gosh, I would just die. And so they hold on to the anchor, and unfortunately, they're taking us down. I mean, we're part of that rope that the anchor's taking people down. So, you know, we're part of this too. So yeah, they're going to raise it, and they're going to do it. Now they say, well, you know, what if there was a default? Well, that might be actually the best thing could ever happen, because they say, oh, the nation goes into default. No, the nation doesn't go into default. I don't go into default. You know, The government goes into default, which means that people aren't going to lend it money. Well, that might not be such a bad thing. I mean, when somebody declares bankruptcy, they've got to do, cash in, cash out, cash basis. And and isn't that what would happen if the government defaulted? Nobody's going to lend them any money because they're a deadbeat. And so all of a sudden, they've got to figure out, oh my gosh, we got this amount of tax revenue. Now, nobody's lending us any money anymore. What are we going to pay? What are we going to abolish? Maybe we better get the troops out of Afghanistan before 2014. Maybe 10, 11 years of killing people and bombing people is enough. And maybe, okay, we can end the occupation of Iraq sooner than, it's been 10 years there too. In other words, all of a sudden they're faced with some real world issues. Now, there's no question about it that the federal officials would be angry as a bunch of snakes. I mean, they rattlesnakes. They'd probably come after the American people and impose huge amount of tax increases and so forth. But what's the difference? You see, I mean, you're going to have to pay that money anyway. Let them try to raise taxes. They are the ones responsible for this, and that ceiling is called a ceiling for a reason, because that's the ceiling. If you're going to keep raising it every time, then it's no ceiling. It's just a fraud. I mean, you're saying, oh, well, you're assuring people, oh, well, we're not going to borrow any more money in 2 years from now because that's a ceiling. If they raise it this time, I guarantee you, 2 years from now, you're going to see the same thing again. Same old nonsense. They're not going to cut anything. Now's the time to keep that ceiling and start abolishing like crazy. I mean, abolish all these socialist programs. It's a great opportunity. These statists, they're so depressed because the whole thing's cracking apart. Back when the New Deal was established, there was a massive amount of wealth in society. And so the statists said, oh, well, gosh, let's take the wealth and give it to the poor. Let's be good and caring and compassionate. And let's, by the way, use it to secure votes from people, grants for your community at election time. Much like these Middle East dictators that the U.S. supports are now doing. Handing out dole to the people in return for support. They always said, we don't need to worry about the long run because in the long run we're all dead. I mean, that's what people were saying back in the 30s and 40s. In the long run we're all dead. So what difference does it make? Just spend to our heart's content, confiscate wealth. Well, now we're at the tail end of their long run, those of us living today. And it looks to me like there's a good chance the welfare states all over the world are now cracking. Okay, they're cracking. And libertarians have been predicting this for decades, because you just can't go on like this, where you've got a system that takes money from one person and gives it to another person, because ultimately that wealth, that pool of wealth, as the Cubans discovered, starts to diminish. So you got a smaller amount of wealth to support, all these people, and as the patient starts, it's easy when there's a lot of wealth. They could go through decades of doing this, but gradually it starts constricting until the point where all of a sudden it just caves in on itself, and that's really what's going on in Greece. They say raise the taxes, raise the taxes. They raise the taxes, then they really kill the golden goose that's producing the amount of tax revenues they have. Because people say, what do we need to work for? We're going to go on the dole like everybody else. And so now, the staters are depressed, they're crying, they're lamenting. Oh, they're blaming it on everybody, the illegal aliens, the banksters, the greed, the speculators, OPEC. I mean, this, standard bit of suspicious characters that they're blaming it on. But it's really the whole concept of the welfare state and the warfare state. That's what's cracking here, and the staters are depressed about it. They're saying, "Oh, give the patient another injection." It's sort of like, remember that movie Weekend at Bernie's? Where the dead guy, they're driving around the town of the dead guy because they don't want to let people know that he's passed away. That they think that, oh well, if we just inject this dead guy with a new stimulus, we can bring him back, and they've been successful. Decade after decade, they have this stimulus Keynesian nonsense where they inject money into the system, but it creates these artificial bubbles. It sends out false signals in the marketplace. You know, people say, oh, interest rates are dropping. Man, I can afford a new home. This is fantastic. And people make investment decisions based on these artificial signals. And then all of a sudden, when everything starts to clear up and the market clears it up, speculators clear it up by saying, you cannot spend a nation rich. This is all misallocation of resources. People buying homes that shouldn't be buying homes. People making investments they shouldn't invest. The bubble bursts, and of course, then all of a sudden you've got a patient that's falling down on the ground, the body politic, if you will, and they say, oh, give him another injection, give him another injection, and they each time. I mean, it's like a heroin addict that needs more. Each time they need more. That's why this big stimulus in the spring, it didn't work. You see, because the heroin addict needs more heroin. And so now they're saying, hey, more stimulus, more stimulus. I mean, what more stimulus could you have than the military? I mean, the military's been spending money out the gazoo. That's government spending. The welfare state, Social Security, Medicare. It may be that it's not working anymore. That all these injections of heroin into the body politic aren't bringing the body back. And the status, of course, are all depressed and everything. I got to be honest with you. I'd be depressed if the whole thing had worked. I mean, it's kind of exciting that the welfare state might finally be cracking apart. That maybe this is our opportunity to dismantle this evil, immoral system that should never have been adopted by Americans. I mean, to turn our back on our heritage of economic liberty and limited government and a constitutional republic and move into this era of militarism and empire and wars of aggression and undeclared wars and torture. Imagine our nation involved in the assassination business, and some of the state is actually proud of that. I mean, it is so disgraceful. It is absolutely shocking and disgraceful. I blogged the other day on a conservative named Krauthammer. You guys are familiar with him, right? He writes one of the most ridiculous op-eds I've ever read from a conservative. It was just shocking because this guy's, he's a smart guy, but he's talking about Libya, and he's saying, well, the declaration of war requirement is outmoded. It's just like horse and buggy. Why? Because, he says, presidents don't follow it. They haven't followed it since World War II. Well, the fact that people are violating the law doesn't make something outmoded. What was the reason for this declaration of war requirement? Krauthammer doesn't go into that. Why did the founding fathers see fit to put it in the Constitution? And the reason is because they said presidents are likely to go off and get this country involved in ridiculous, idiotic, destructive, deadly, expensive wars that bankrupt a nation. I mean, remember the Soviet Union? Remember what Ronald Reagan said? He said, we brought down the Soviet Union by making the government spend itself into bankruptcy. Well, if the Soviet Union can spend itself into bankruptcy, why not the United States government too? And that's what happened with the British Empire. And so the framers said, we want to make it difficult for the president to wage war. We don't want to make it easier. Krauthammer says, no, let's make it easier. Let's, instead of a declaration of war requirement, let's use a resolution. And so from now on, we'll just have resolutions in support of the president. And his rationale is because, well, resolutions are kind of used today, and so, let's get with the program and so forth. No talk at all about making it difficult for the president to wage war. You see, he's making it easier. But the framers said, we don't want to make it easier. You see, it's not outmoded at all, Mr. Krauthammer. The same reasoning applies. Look at Obama in Libya. Look at George W. Bush in Iraq and Afghanistan. Look how easy it was for them to take their standing army, which the framers and the founding fathers opposed also, and just invade these countries. Imagine how much more difficult it would have been if they'd had to go to Congress and ask for a declaration of war. Imagine some congressman saying, Mr. President, We want to see your evidence on WMDs in Iraq. We want to see the evidence on these mushroom clouds and this yellow cake lie that you've got coming out of Niger. We want to see these lies so we can pierce them, because we saw the lies at the Gulf of Tonkin. We've seen the lies on Jessica Lynch and Tomlinson, the football player, and so forth. We want to examine this case before we start invading these countries. And we want to know whether the Taliban government conspired with Osama bin Laden before we attack and kill so many Afghans. But Krauthammer, and the funny thing is that these conservatives, remember, they're always talking about their devotion to the Constitution and how important the Constitution is, and they criticize the liberals, in all their speeches, and they'll say, the liberals believe in a breathing Constitution where the Constitution, they can breathe all kinds of, different interpretations into them, and they stand for, original intent and all this. And then here's Mr. Conservative that says, oh, well, it's an outmoded position. Yeah, the presidents aren't following it. Well, that's ridiculous. I mean, what do we libertarians say? Enforce it. Why? It's not outmoded. Obama's proven it's not outmoded. Bush has proved it's not outmoded. They're proving that the framers were right. Look how easy it is to involve the entire nation into war, and look how devastating it is. Even the Congress is scared to cut off the money for it, because they're going to be called, well, what about national pride? And what if the president's embarrassed because he has to bring the troops home without killing Gaddafi and establishing a U.S. Puppet, which is, of course, what this is all about, regime change, which is what foreign policy is all these invasions and occupations are about. And then the best part, though, was Krauthammer says, well, this is how we're going to accomplish this, that the president and the Congress will get together. That they'll appoint a commission. God, when I read that, the commission, I mean, how many times do we have to deal with? Every time there's a big problem, hey, appoint a commission. You got to hand it to conservatives and liberals too. I mean, they do give us some comic relief. Of course, the liberals are over there supporting Obama because he's claiming to help the poor as he's bombing them, and of course, when you ask these liberals, can we let the Libyan refugees into the United States? Those are escaping the country. Can we let them come over here? Oh, no. We have immigration controls. In other words, they love the poor, but hey, they don't want them. They don't love them so much that they're going to bring them over. So I mean, there's a lot of comic relief that these people provide us. But in any event, Krauthammer says we're going to appoint a commission that's going to come up with the proper language on this resolution business, and then he's going to have a national historian named David McCullough who's going to read the resolution at a signing ceremony. Now get that, there's going to be a signing ceremony with the president and Congress where they sign it, McCullough reads the thing, and now it's the law of the land. Now, do you notice something odd about this? I mean, the Constitution, Mr. Krauthammer, is the highest law, okay? I mean, I'm sure you know this. It is the law that we, the people, impose on federal officials. We, the people, called the federal government into existence as our servants. We called the presidency into existence, the Congress into existence. These people are our servants. We're the boss, okay? And if we want to dismantle the government, we have that ability within the Constitution. It's called an amendment process. So if you don't like something, if you don't like the declaration of war requirement, you've got to go through the process. You can't amend the Constitution by having just the president and the Congress decide to amend it. That's what they do in these dictatorial regimes, where the Constitution ain't worth the paper it's written on, that they just amend it whenever they want. That's not the way it works in this country, and I'm sure you must know this. That if you want to change a provision like the Declaration of War requirement, you've got to get, 2/3 of both houses of Congress to approve it, and then it's got to go to the states, and you got 3/4 of the state legislatures approve it, or you call a constitutional convention. I mean, there's procedures for amending the Constitution, Mr. Krauthammer, and if you're gonna let the president and the Congress ignore these things and make fun of them and I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, then how are we different from just a democratically elected dictatorship like in Latin America or so forth? You know, I mean, I'm sure you'd agree with me, Mr. Krauthammer, that democracy isn't necessarily freedom. And so you can have a democratically elected dictatorship, and if they're not going to have to obey the Constitution, I mean, you're right. You know, you said in your article that the Supreme Court's not going to get involved. Long ago, they realized that the president was never going to comply with their decision in foreign affairs, so they might as well not expose this dictatorial aspect of the government, that the Supreme Court is impotent when it comes to foreign policy. The president essentially is a dictator. He's got a huge army at his disposal who's loyal to him, who will follow his orders, not any orders from Congress or Supreme Court and whatever. He's going to follow the orders of the president. They're going to do whatever he says. We've seen that now and time after time again. And so essentially we've got a president with dictatorial powers overseas, and how you got conservatives saying, oh, well, let's eliminate the declaration of war requirement. It's okay to ignore him. Nonsense. We libertarians say if the Supreme Court isn't going to enforce it because they're scared of being exposed as impotent in this area, impeach the president. You know, impeach him and put him on trial. Let him come and justify it and send a message. Even if he's acquitted, send a message. You're not going to do this anymore. You're not going to violate our Constitution, our law of the land. You know, it's funny watching some of the statements come out on this debt ceiling, though. You know, there's a New York Times editorial that said, oh no, you know, that this would be terrible to impair the government's trustworthiness and the you know the creditworthiness and so forth. And then you see it also on the Libya thing, that we can't stop the Libya operation because it would hurt national pride. The president would be humiliated. Our nation would be humiliated. Hey, I wouldn't be humiliated. You know, when these people have to obey the Constitution, that's just the way it is. And if Gaddafi pokes fun at Obama and makes, you know, teases him and so forth and humiliates him, that's Obama's problem. I mean, he's got to work on his own self-esteem issues if he's going to let that problem affect him. But you know, the fact that people let the statists use that as an argument that, oh, national pride and self-respect, and absolutely ridiculous. And then another fascinating part of this is that you can see the difference between statists and libertarians. The statists are saying, get out of these foreign countries, Afghanistan, Iraq, so we can use the money over here to rebuild America. Instead of rebuild Iraq, and you rebuild Afghanistan and Yemen and Pakistan and everybody else we're rebuilding, you know. But notice that you see in their mind, the money belongs to society. That we take the money over here and we bring it back home and we build bridges with it and we build parks with it and so forth. I mean, the statist mindset, that's the way he sees it, is people's money belongs to the nation. It's not really their money. It's the national income, the national wealth. We libertarians, no. Stop this warfare state, stop the occupations, and leave people free to keep their own money, to plan their own lives, to pay their own expenses. You know, this country lived without an income tax for more than 100 years. This was before the advent of socialism in America. And got along fine. I mean, it produced all the wealth, that huge base of wealth, that in the 1930s captured the attention of the statists when they said, hey, man, boy, look at all that money out here. Time for us to confiscate it with Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and so forth. And I guarantee you, those first Social Security recipients didn't put any money in, you know, because they just started receiving money, and that's the way the system's been based ever since. Just a straight confiscate and transfer program, and, you know, the pie is diminishing. But, you know, they have this concept of, oh, national income. We libertarians say, look, let's do some reflecting here on what our country stands for, what our heritage is, you know, where we're going as a country, where we're going as a people, and now we've had two opportunities to compare. We have the free market opportunity, and I'm not saying it was a perfect society from 1787 to, you know, the New Deal. I mean, there was a lot of controls and regulations. There was slavery in there, and there was tariffs, and but by and large, no one can deny that there was no income tax, no Social Security, no Medicare, no Medicaid, no occupational licensure, no economic regulations to speak of, no systems of public schooling, no immigration controls, no drug war, no gun control, no foreign wars, no war empire, no standing army to speak of. This is a remarkable society, and now we have a society, and have for many years, that's the exact opposite. Ironically, both people in these opposite societies call it free. And so now, we have an opportunity to make a choice here. Do we keep going with the socialist, interventionist, fascistic type society, or do we restore and build on the principles of freedom on which our nation was initially founded? And again, not perfectly. Slavery was obviously a big example, but for people that didn't have to pay income taxes or Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, this is a remarkable way of life, and that's what we've got to decide as a country. What we're going to do here. And people say, oh, well, Americans, they're just like Greeks. They would have to stay dependent on Social Security. It's too embedded in Medicare and Medicaid and education grants and farm subsidies, and that Americans would never free themselves of these socialist programs. Nonsense. Nonsense. My feeling is when people finally realize the tremendous burden they're placing on this country, especially the seniors, according to the mortuary table, seniors are going to be checking out sooner than the younger people, and you think that as you get closer to the end of the road here, that you think I got to do some right things here. I got to make things right, and I gotta leave a better way of life for people. And what better way of life could there be than getting rid of all this socialism, not reforming it, not tinkering with it, not trying to make it work better, ditching it entirely and building on this libertarian vision of people keep everything they earn, massive capital accumulation, get rid of all these regulations, the SEC and the DEA and the IRS, no income tax, and none of this warfare and militarism and assassination programs and CIA and regime change and military-industrial complex. In other words, we do a really big evaluation in this country, and I think we need to do that because we're heading toward a great big iceberg, and to sit there and have drinking and have partying and stuff like there was no problems, it ain't the way to go. Now, one of the good things in this is this drug war. I've been full time in the libertarian movement for about 21 years there at the Future of Freedom Foundation. I guess 23 years, because I was at the Foundation for Economic Education for a couple of years before that. But I have never seen so many pro-end the drug war articles in my entire life. It's incredible. Finally people have seen the light. Regular people, You've got this global commission where you have all these renowned people, ex-presidents of countries and prominent officials and stuff that are saying this thing, it ain't working. It's 40 years and it hasn't worked. And then two government reports came out and said something to the effect that the drug war has not stemmed the tide of drugs coming in. Now that's a major assessment, because if it hasn't stemmed the tide after 40 years, what's it good for? Well, we all know what it's good for. It's good at lining the pockets of police departments and judges and prosecutors, not just with bribes, and there's a lot of them on the take, prosecutors too. But you got acid forfeiture laws. They love that. They're out there confiscating people's assets. They're stealing. Really, they're just stealing people's assets. So the drug war is a big money maker, and that's the big reason. There are two big groups that are most in favor of the drug war still, and that's the government and the drug lords, because everybody knows that if drugs were legalized, it'd be like prohibition ending. The drug lords would go out of business, as did the alcohol lords, but so would the DEA agents and so forth, and the military that's involved in all this. You wouldn't need them for that anymore, and they know that. But by golly, you've got these huge numbers of articles. We link to them in our FFF email update. We can't keep up with the drug war articles these days. I mean, and most of them are pretty hardcore. They're not just saying, "Oh, legalize marijuana." Some of them do, but a lot of them are saying it's time to end the war on all of them. Because if you criminalize anything, heroin, cocaine, whatever it happens to be, you're going to end up with that violence and the black market and so forth. It's just time to end this thing. And then the addicts come out into the open and they start talking about their problem. They're too scared to do that now because you never know who's a narc. Um, so that's some good news here. Um, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Google and the U.S. going after Google, but I know we're about out of time, so maybe I'll save that for next time. One of the interesting little articles I wanted to tell you about is about Osama bin Laden. I found this kind of interesting. It says that the United States, the federal court drops charges against bin Laden. Federal judge in Manhattan formally dismissed a series of indictments against bin Laden. And the indictments related not to 9/11, which was interesting. They never indicted him for that. He was indicted for bombings of embassies in East Africa. And, the reason that's interesting is because, you see, terrorism is a criminal offense. I mean, no one can deny that. I know there's people that say, no, it's not, it's an act of war. Well, no, it's a criminal offense. And this criminal indictment for these terrorist attacks confirms that. I mean, there's a reason why a lot of these people end up in federal court because it's a criminal offense. It always has been, or at least, that it's when it was enacted in the law as a criminal offense. I don't know when that was. It was considered a criminal offense. That's why Zacharias Moussaoui and Padilla and all of them have been in federal court and now are sitting in a federal penitentiary. So this is another acknowledgement of that. Now, why they didn't indict bin Laden? Well, my hunch is that they were scared. They didn't know whether they had enough evidence to convict him, so they decided to go this route where enemy combatant route, and that way they don't need any evidence. They just treat somebody as a terrorist and torture them or kill them or assassinate them or execute them or whatever. Oh yeah, have a kangaroo military tribunal. But there's a lot of problems with our criminal justice system, no question about it. But let me tell you something. We have the best system anywhere in the world. Where people have criminal defense lawyers and they can defend themselves against unjust indictments, and we've seen that time and time again where juries find people innocent or not guilty of the charges. And so when they concocted this newfangled system of the Pentagon having an alternative judicial system, it was absolutely a disgrace. It still is a disgrace because that system resembles the totalitarian systems, the systems in Cuba, Hitler's Germany. He had his people's court to try terrorists, and he created it specially to try terrorists so they could never be acquitted. That's the same reason why they have this war on terrorism case. I don't know whether bin Laden would have been convicted or not, but that's our system. That a person comes into court and he's accused of the crime. They have to prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and if they cannot do that, then that person walks. And that's a system that came into existence in 1781, I guess, with the Bill of Rights. Well, I guess it was in existence before then. The Bill of Rights sort of codified it, and it's something that we Americans should be proud of. We got a really good system with a presumption of innocence and trial by jury, which is a phenomenal right. Habeas corpus that the framers put into the Constitution. We must not let the Pentagon continue to hijack this system. Their system is a shame. It resembles the totalitarian countries, and this dismissal of these indictments against bin Laden remind us that this is a criminal offense, that this is what our nation stands for, and it's not this optional system where they can go after somebody in federal court or with these kangaroo tribunals. So anyway, that's our show tonight. Hope you enjoyed it. Had another good time with talking to you guys tonight, and look forward to talking to you next week. Thanks so much for listening in, and I'll see you next Saturday, and have a nice rest of the weekend. Bye.